Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're back in War Thunder looking at another user mission, and this follows another user model. This model is the XF-85 Goblin, and it's made by Beckett, the same lad who's behind the Rat and the Tog and all of those wonderful machines. If you want to play this machine in game, I will leave a link in the description to the user mission itself, but understand that certain parts of it are not exactly working correctly and might crash your game, so there should be 3 separate options of what you can pick, you know, the user mission and then the stuff under Beckett's vehicles. What I would tell you to do is just play the user mission, because the other 2, well, at least for my system, it crashes the game. So that's my little bit of advice to you. Now, in this video, we're going to go through a general history of the XF-85, and we're also going to go through will we ever see something like it in game? Because obviously with new mechanics flying through, you know, we've got helicopters, we have talk of air-to-air missiles, we have talk of many different stuff coming. You know, we've had a bunch of new mechanics put in because of naval forces. Why not throw something like this into the mix? So we're going to go through, you know, whether it's worth it, or what my general opinions are of something like this idea. So the first thing to understand is why does the XF-85 exist? There was only 2 of them made, and it was basically, we'll call it a failed project, the end of the 1940s. So in the late 1940s, the US Air Force had a new bomber. This was the B-36. Now if you don't know what the B-36 is, take a B-29 and just give it a bunch of roids. That's basically the B-36. I'll probably do a video on it separately later on. It was the largest mass-produced piston engine aircraft ever made, and it boasted the longest wingspan of any combat aircraft ever, 230 feet, and it had a range of 10,000 miles and a bomb load of up to 44 tons. And the B-36 was the world's first bomber that with an unrefueled intercontinental range. So this was a big step up from whatever we'd seen before when it came to bombers. The issue, though, with creating this, you know, the B-36 and the ideas around it, is at the time, generally bombers needed support in some ways. So the Air Force themselves feared that if they sent these B-36s into combat zones without fighter protection, then they would have a few issues, because obviously they couldn't defend themselves against whatever new modern technology they may be fighting. So, therefore, because of this, they needed an idea, and at the time there was no fighters in development which could keep up with the giant bomber on the long flights across the oceans and continents, and therefore, because of this, they needed something. They needed something to be able to make sure to keep these things safe. Also, another little tidbit that you do have to realize, this was before the idea of aerial refueling. So, the way that we do it nowadays is obviously we can refuel planes in the air. This means that they can stay in the air for longer, but at that time, in the late 40s, this technology was probably in some way being developed, but it wasn't at the forefront that we see it today. So, the flying branch pitched some ideas to the industry and basically said, hey, we need some stuff made which could try and help with this. There were a few ideas, such as equipping a B-36 with a tow cable and having a bomber drag a fighter behind it, so kind of how they used to do the old gliders back in World War II, basically dragging a glider behind a plane and then you know, cutting the cable, dropping the cable, and then the glider gliding down. Instead of this case, the glider would be a aircraft, so probably quite a lot heavier, but and then the idea would be you would release the smaller plane near the target zone to fend off the enemy, and if the fighter survived, it would somehow reattach itself to the B-36. And this was a problem that generally wasn't really figured out. So actual reattachment, it's all well and good dragging something behind a machine. The problem is when you release it in the middle of the air, it goes off and does its thing, and then you have to reattach it again. And this was something that was never really discussed, or the plans never really got to that stage. There was also other problems, such as the bomber's drag increasing by towing the fighter behind it, and it would also, the fighter would be in the B-36 slipstream, so obviously that would cause issues as well. Now, on top of all of this, they actually found a slightly realistic scheme, or at least compared to those, some of the ideas that were thrown out. They wanted to design a jet fighter that would be small enough to fit inside a B-36 bomb bay. So you would fit it in, then when the formation of B-36s were going towards its target, there would be certain B-36s which had these escort planes inside of them, and once they were attacked, by enemy air, you could open the bomb bay, drop these jets or little fighters out, and they could go out and take on, the universe. Now, this idea was called by the Air Force parasite fighters, and the dimensions were limited by the size of the B-36's bomb bay, because you've got to remember this whole idea hinges on the B-36, so this design wasn't really designed for anything else. Now, obviously, as you're looking at the user mission has B-29s, that's because we don't have B-36s in game. So if we did have B-36s, they would be there instead. Anyway, so the plane itself, it could not be longer than 15 feet, it could not be taller than 9 feet, and also possess wings which were no longer than 5 feet across when folded up. So we're talking about a very, very small machine. And also, the parasite fighter could not weigh more than 3 tons, and it would carry 4 machine guns. Also, it should fly to 600 miles per hour for 1 hour. So we're talking about a lot of design constraints here, but generally it could be done. Now, a lot of the aircraft corporations kind of just went, no, we have other projects to work on, this sounds like a pipe dream, what the hell are you talking about? But McDonnell Aircraft Corporation. Now, if you don't know who McDonnell is, McDonnell are the guys behind stuff like the Banshee that we have in game. They're kind of known for their weird and wonderful and different designs, and there are a lot of planes out there which are created by, the McDonnell Aircraft Corporation, and I would definitely say, go and have a look, because they are at least interesting when it comes to it. Now, back then, they were called McDonnell Aircraft Corporation. Today, well, not today, but they were then morphed into McDonnell Douglas, and then they were eventually bought out in 1997 when they actually merged. As I said, some of the aircraft behind them, they had the Banshee, the Goblin, the Voodoo, the Demon, and then also the F4 Phantom II and the FH Phantom. They had some quite bulky and quite interesting jets, and also some slim ones. So overall, an interesting company. Now, back to what they were doing. So McDonnell took on this idea. They were willing to work within the constraints that were set before them, and the company's engineers took a Westinghouse J34 jet engine and added a tiny cockpit right on top of it, and then they also added very small wings to it that folded vertically. And basically because of this, you had an engine where somebody sat on it with some very small wings, which is what the Air Force was asking for. Now, at the time, the B-36 was still actually in development, but they knew that they wanted to go along with this idea, so they were kind of preempting themselves with this parasite fighter plan. They wanted to create something before they knew it would become an issue, which is something that normally, at least during World War II, you've got to remember this is post-World War II at this point. In World War II, sometimes some of these ideas, like foresight, were not something that was considered. Nowadays, and back then, in 48, yes, it's nice to see that they had some foresight with the idea that if the B-36 was miles away from home, it may need a little bit of support. So, because it was still in development and none were ready for testing, when McDonnell finished his 2 XF-85 prototypes and the Air Force accepted them for trials in the summer of 1948, the testers modified a B-29 to serve as a B-36 surrogate. So they fitted the wartime bomber with an extendable trapeze that cradled, launched, and retrieved the parasite fighter. So this is why, even though this machine was designed to fit in the B-36 bomb bay, whenever you see pictures of it, it's on like this contraption underneath an EB-29, which is designed to hold it. So understand the testing is not exactly perfect for what it's supposed to do, but it still, simulates what it will eventually do in the B-36. So the flight tests, which began in July 1948, let's just say they didn't go great. The first steps did, though, which is always positive. So the first steps, the separation, they went pretty good. But on August the 22nd, test pilot Ed Schock, I'm not exactly sure how to say that, he discovered that reattaching one moving aircraft to another is not exactly easy to do. So he failed to dock on his first attempt, and as he closed in on his second attempt, the trapeze's bridle hit the upper part of the cockpit canopy, and the canopy shattered, and the bridle shocked Schock's helmet and oxygen mask off, shocking him temporarily. So let's just say he had a bit of a mishap when trying to reconnect. So before he actually regained control again, the plane had dropped several thousand feet, and the pilot landed on the ground rather than attempt another mid-air hookup, and aerial refueling developed quickly as well, and that basically rendered the parasite fighter idea completely useless. The B-36 was also retired in 1959, having never seen combat. So it's nice that they had the foresight to see that the B-36 may have these issues, especially in the late 40s with a lot of tensions going up. But the idea of a parasite fighter is an interesting one, but it's just one of those designs which logistically is not exactly the easiest. I mean, even on top of all of the problems that they talk about, what about the fact of the performance of the XF-85? One of the things that was found with it during general testing of its flight characteristics, it was a worse performing aircraft than the fighters it was supposed to go up against if a war broke out between major nations. We're talking about the Soviets here, we're talking about the Asian districts. So the problem that the XF-85 would have is, even if it was deployed and even if it was successful at being out there to defend the bombers, it was still inferior to a lot of the fighters it would face, and this would mean it would kind of be dead in the air, and therefore you wouldn't want to fly that thing if you knew that you were going in on a disadvantage. Now, how does this relate to War Thunder? Well, to be honest, with ideas like the XF-85, as somebody who likes to see a bit of balance between nations, I personally can't see this thing being added to the game. Not every nation tested this kind of idea, and therefore will be in a scenario which we kind of have now with helicopters. So, the three major nations have helicopters in the game right now. Now, I'm sure every other nation will eventually get them. The problem is, at high tier, it means that, let's say if you're playing as Britain, you can be smashed by helicopters that you don't even have, and you can't counter them because your planes are too expensive. So what happens in this regard is you are put at an inherent disadvantage because you do not have the vehicle type that the enemy does. Now imagine if the XF-85 is added to game, and it's actually pretty good. Well, the problem with this is no other nation can get anything similar to it. This also includes if it's just an AI machine as well. What if they made it so it was an attachment for a B-29, so you could just throw away an AI, XF-85, or maybe you could control it from the B-29, and your B-29 is docile while you're controlling it. Like, that to me sounds like a really cool idea. But the problem is, you can't balance it between the nations. You could only have it balanced in a way if the XF-85s just faced each other. So overall, even though it's a cool and interesting part of our history, I don't see it coming to War Thunder in any big way. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.